Hey everybody, thanks for tuning in to All Things Division 3 Soccer with Simple Coach and Jackie. I am Simple Coach, and donning her blue striped sweater is Jackie. Okay, so I decided I'm starting a new show. Happenstance would have it. I think I've mentioned in the past how I post to message boards, in particular one that you find on d3soccer.com. And if you go on d3soccer.com, there's a button sort of on the way down, orangey yellowish. It says message boards. So I go in there. There's men's soccer, women's soccer, a bunch of sports, but men's soccer and women's soccer, sometimes the football I chime in on. On men's soccer board, there are some really, really smart folks who know more about D3 soccer than I could hope to ever pick up or learn or know. And when I started this channel, they were sort of my barometer, right? Like, how high do I have to be? And I thought I would never be able to get to that level. So, one of those gentlemen, one of those posters on the men's soccer board on d3soccer.com goes by the handle of Paul Newman. So hence the thumbnail and that you saw. He probably posts some of the most intelligent posts. Tweets? No. On the board. And he does this weekly sort of review of games and interesting things he's seen, sort of what I do in Around D3, which, but it's his own take. And so, I enjoy it so much every week. I think everybody does, that I thought, man, that would be great. So if we did a show. So I emailed Paul Newman. I said, hey, Paul Newman, I'm a fan. Loved your movies. Is there a chance that you'd be interested in doing a show? Turns out I tapped into his desire to be a sportscaster when he grows up. So this is the net result, a new show. And this is the first episode. Where this goes, I don't know. We're already talking about doing one next week and making this regular because it was so good. I had originally thought it would be part of Around D3, just make it a segment. But this is too good to bog down in some other stuff. So this is standalone. So I'm introducing to you a very, turns out, really bright, really intelligent gentleman by the name of Nicholas Petrou, who goes by the name of Paul Newman on the men's soccer boards on d3soccer.com. Hope you enjoy. Hey, Nicholas. This is great that we're getting together to do this segment on D3 soccer, of which you know a ton more than most. So, hey, why don't we just start? Why don't you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about who you are?
Sure. Well, thanks for having me on. This is like definitely a thrill for me. My name is Nicholas Petrou. I think most people know me from the soccer boards that we met on as Paul Newman. And Paul Newman, I think a lot of the people on the board may be too young for this, but may not even know who Paul Newman is.
Cool hand
Paul
Luke,
Newman
man.
was one of the more famous Kenyan alums. And he was actually there. I think it was 1947. He was in the Great Fire of Old Kenyan, like the grandest building on the campus. So that's where the Paul Newman came from. I grew up in North Carolina, about 35 miles north of Raleigh-Durham Chapel Hill, right off I-85, heading towards the Virginia border. I stayed in state and went to college at Davidson, where I played a little tennis. And studied philosophy for a year in Boston after that, and then found my way to Pittsburgh, where I got into clinical psychology. And I'm also trained as a forensic psychologist, which is basically what I do now. Kenyon just happened to be, I was one of those fanatics who made, you're just doing this now, so I appreciate it. It's one of the most fun times of my life, making all these, tons and tons of college lists and then ranking them. And like my kid had 10% of the interest that I had. So a lot of over parenting and over coaching, but he found his way to Kenyon. I think I love it more than he did, and he definitely loved it. And it's not just the soccer program, just the place itself. For me, as a very biased person, it's like a little slice of heaven there.
Gambier is absolutely beautiful, and the campus is stunning. Like, for anybody who gets a chance to go.
So I definitely love the soccer program. I think Coach Brown has done phenomenal things. I mean, before my kid went there, they had been to the NCAA tournament a couple of years before that, but they had a long drought since their heydays in the late 90s. And, the last decade, other than not winning a title, I mean, they've really been incredible. And I don't know all the reasons why I've continued to follow. And as a psychologist, I should study that a little bit more. Every year I think I'm done, and then I'm obviously not done. So that's, and obviously ended up in Massachusetts. So
your clinical psychology, maybe afterwards, maybe we could do a joint therapy session as to why we're doing what we're doing, because I often wonder, what the heck am I doing? And like I mentioned, for anyone who's on, who has a chance to go to d3soccer.com, to go on the boards and to look up your posts that you do, summary reviews of sort of like the week, which is sort of where this idea came about. You have a grasp of D3 soccer that probably no one else does. And it could be your years of experience, could be your clinical psychology, who knows? But it's just awesome to see, because it does feed a lot of sort of what I look at and sort of where I pay attention to, because I rely on your expertise. And let me just say, as we were prepping for this, I was totally thrilled at sort of some of the ideas that you had. And the first one I'd really love to sort of talk about is Stevens Institute of Technology, who I think is one of the best teams, and actually looks like one of the best teams that I have seen so far this year. So maybe you could talk about that for a little.
Sure. Yeah, I was, like I told you, I said, let's don't spend all our time on the Nescac, which a lot of us do on the boards. But yeah, Stevens, the whole idea of talking about Stevens today, it kind of came from a random thought I had in one of those summaries you were talking about, where I made a comment about them being sort of the mystery team among the top teams. And it's not because there's really any question about them. I mean, I think all the four polls that we look at and that you and I are involved in, they've been like number 5 to 7, I think, basically. I mean, they're one of the most consistently placed teams that we've had so far. Mm-hmm. And I think this last fan poll we did, I think all of us had them at like 5 or 6. And then I started thinking about, why do I sort of think of them as kind of a mystery team? And, I realized that, one, I don't think anybody knows exactly where they are. Like, are they in Pennsylvania, New Jersey, New York State? They're obviously in New Jersey. They're in Hoboken. I think of Hoboken. I think of the Sopranos. I actually read a little bit about Hoboken. It's a very interesting history of that town, city, small city. But they've, they've been sort of a little bit like an orphan where I think they were in a conference called the Empire 8 that may be dissolved, and now they're in something called the MACF. Before yesterday, if you had asked me to name 3 teams in that conference, I wouldn't have been able to do it. So they're sort of, a little bit a big time, and they've been a big time program, for as long as I've been following. They've usually made the NCAA tournament. Like last year, they took Tufts to PKs in a very fiercely, I think, a little bit controversial game. They've had some like really, really good years. If I just check my notes a second, they in 2018 they were 17-3-2. They lost to Tufts in the second round 1-0. 2017 they beat Middlebury and Cortland before they lost to Messiah in the Sweet 16. So, and then thinking more about, why they don't sort of more readily come to mind, I do think there's like this oversaturated market in Pennsylvania and New Jersey, and people tend to immediately think about Messiah and Franklin and Marshall, the NJAC teams, Rowan and Montclair State, and then I think they're even a little bit overshadowed by some of the Sunyak teams like Oneonta and Cortland. The Nescac a little bit. So that's sort of what I came up with when I was asking myself why isn't Stevens one of the names that, doesn't immediately roll off your tongue when you're thinking about all these teams. But obviously they're doing extremely well this year. They've had some big wins. And I think I agree with you. I think they're for real this year, and they're going to be a tough team for other people to handle.
Yeah, that's you know what. You said something interesting about like it's almost like a saturated marketplace. It is very true. Like we do think about sort of the usual suspects, and then I don't know about you, but then I'm always trying to look west because there's teams out west that I want to, and regardless, it's always like, I've already looked at enough Eastern teams. And so Steven sometimes I think gets lost in that shuffle as I'm looking, okay, let's look at, CMS and let's look at University of Redlands, the usual suspects, Trinity.
Hey, and again, I think a big part for Stevens is that they don't really belong to another group of other really good teams.
Yeah. So yeah, that's very true. But I'll tell you, watching them, they're special. They got something. And even I thought last year they looked a lot better than I think most teams. And I think part of it, again, my bias is that they actually like to play, right? They like to own the ball. They like to keep it on the deck. They're not these, I call them second ball teams where they'll launch it forward and try like make it look ugly. They're actually trying to do things what I think are the right way. So really,
they're a very experienced team. I think they have like 5 fifth-year players. They have multiple all-region players. So yeah, I think they're going to be a handful for anybody.
Yeah. So I know we don't want to necessarily dominate the conversation with the NESCAC teams, but I just did want to get your impression on how crazy it's been. I can't say that I've been wowed by, again, the usuals. I think Connecticut just doesn't look like the Connecticut of last year. I don't think Tufts looks like the Tufts of last year. But then I think Williams looks pretty good. And I think it just seems a whole jumble, and it almost has my universe a little bit out of whack because I can't get my arms around it. So maybe
I think that Nescac. I definitely don't think like some that it's really down a little bit. I mean, a team or two may be still figuring themselves out, like a Tufts that's replacing a huge number of players. But the depth, I think, is really real. and other than the UAA is really, I mean, I think Nescac may be better than ever, which for a non-Nescac lover like myself living in New England isn't the greatest thing. But, I've learned sort of the hard, like I was one of those people who never was impressed with Tufts. And every year for a few years, I had that same kind of impression. And then I kept watching them hoist the trophy at the end of the season. So I personally am not worried about Tufts at all right now, even though they drew with I think a really good, pretty good Babson team last night.
Yeah.
But and then they're just so and then now with I think Wesleyan and now Hamilton and like you said, Williams. I mean, nobody's even talking about Williams. That's the most famous Nescac that there is.
Yeah.
So it's just so crowded. I mean, you got the big four of Tufts, Middlebury, Conn College, and Amherst. And now you've got Wesleyan and Hamilton, bursting their way into the scene. Yeah. So it's, it's definitely going to be interesting to see how that all plays out.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, I don't doubt it. It's like a big slugfest. And I don't discount Tufts. I don't discount any of those teams' capabilities. I think they do need to, for their own health, I think they almost need to get out of the Nescac for a game or two just to not beat each other silly every game. I think that's the biggest danger for any of those teams is the slog that they go through, and can they survive it for the end of the season and the postseason? And then they become super dangerous. So,
yeah.
So on a different piece of news that is really interesting is that in the GNAC, St. Joseph's in Maine had a 57-game regular season unbeaten streak, which is, I mean, that's got to be something for the record books, right? And 30 of those games are unbeaten at home. So maybe you could, your thoughts on that, and then of course this team Johnson and Wales out of Rhode Island ending it for them.
Yeah. This was of all the things I came up with for today, this is the one that is the most fun to me. I don't know how many other people enjoy it, but this just happened like yesterday, and I can't even remember how I came across it, but I came across the recap for, I think it was on the Johnson and Wales site. And I saw the 50-game win streak, and then Johnson and Wales has a 30-game home unbeaten streak. And St. Joseph's, Maine has been, at least in New England, like the media darling for like the last 5 or so years. So among the sort of, for lack of a better word, the sort of mid-major teams, like St. Joseph's has been like a star. And I didn't even really know Johnson and Wales had a program. I mean, I know they've it feels like they've franchised, like there's a Johnson and Wales in Colorado. I think there's one in Charlotte.
I thought it's Charlotte or North Carolina or Virginia. And that's who I thought it was. I was like, this must be a typo.
Right. But their coach, Dave Kulik, he's in his 10th year. So obviously the program has been around. He's done a really good job with it. He had been the coach at Clark, I think, for 12 years before that. And he was like All-American, All-Ivy at Yale. And then I think he was an assistant at like Boston College and Tufts and one other place I'm forgetting. And I think his wife was the longtime women's coach at Boston College. So he's obviously done a great job. Just a couple of years ago, they were like, what were they? They were 17-3-2 in 2019, and they lost. They made the NCAA tournament, and they lost in the first round to Middlebury. But they're 6-1-2 this year. They beat WPI, which is a solid program. And they obviously just had this historic win over the St. Joseph's Monks from Maine. But the thing I was the most excited about sharing, this is what in terms of when you talk about my knowledge, this is like, I'm not like you and some of the other people on the site who can, tell you exactly what formation the team's in and why did they start playing it down the right flank, or that's not my expertise, but this is more like my expertise. That I saw that the Johnson and Wales field is right on the banks of the gorgeous Narragansett Bay, overlooking the ocean. And the name of the place, this just amazes me, is the Scott's Miracle-Gro Athletic Complex. So Scott's Miracle-Gro, but the field is synthetic turf. So, I feel like I should mic drop and never appear on your show again.
We're done. We're done for this. Oh my gosh. I read that. I was laughing yesterday for probably 30 minutes just thinking about it. Just like,
I think that's fantastic.
But yeah, maybe Scott's Miracle-Gro has figured out the solution. Everybody's going to get turf from now on. Don't have to worry about the weeds. Oh, that's my gosh. That's fantastic. Hey, so we, us nut jobs on the boards talk about turf versus grass. Talk about sort of teams who might be disappointing, or again, like I think, you myself just sort of look under the covers probably way too much, more so than healthy. But who would you say have sort of disappointed, or before? Obviously, they're going into conference play, so all bets are off at that point. But
right.
Who do you think were you looking at? Were saying, I was expecting more.
Yeah, well, there's a couple of categories, and I think some of it can definitely be explained. But there are teams like, Rowan and Cortland, St. Olaf, that I think many of us thought, those are all top 10, potentially top 5 teams, and they've struggled a little bit. I mean, they're all around 500 or a little bit above 500, and those that I just named. And also what I call the West Coast Big Three, Redlands, Claremont, Mudd Scripps, and Pacific Lutheran. They've all had unbelievable monster schedules. So their strength of schedule, which, I didn't realize any of this when I started following, but the strength of schedule ends up being so huge at tournament selection time.
Yeah.
So a team could be 10-6-1 and still get in the tournament because they have an astronomical SOS. And I think all those teams are potentially in that category, although the West teams, they've tried hard to schedule tougher, but the West Coast teams have a little bit more challenge with that.
Challenges, yeah.
But the ones that have been really disappointing so far, and again, some of these also have had really, really tough schedules, or Trinity in Texas, obviously. Last year's darling, Washington College.
Yeah.
Emory. And then my rival, Ohio Wesleyan. And I think I noted on the board that, Ohio Wesleyan, I think they just got their first win the other day.
Yeah.
They could run the table in the NCAC conference, and they were ahead of Calvin 1-0 at the half. They've had some really tight, I don't believe at all that Ohio Wesleyan isn't really, really good.
Yeah.
So I think there's a chance that even those teams at the second category that have really struggled, I think, there's a decent chance, like Trinity, Texas.
Mm-hmm.
I'd be surprised to not see them in their conference final.
Yeah.
So those are sort of but so far they have been a little bit disappointed.
Yeah. I do. The two that stood out to me are St. Olaf. there's something not right. And it's hard for me to capture. They just don't look that like that dynamic team that they were and free flowing that they were last
Mm-hmm.
year. And then to your point, Ohio Wesleyan, the games I've watched, I'm like, these guys are in it, and they just, for whatever reason, right, that final third when it matters to score a goal, they can't, and then they make a silly mistake in the back and they're down, and so like you, I think it's totally temporary, and they did just win the other day, and I think once they get their stride and they're in the NCAC, I think they'll be back. They'll be back at their normal selves. So,
Right.
um, and then conversely, like who do you think is people are not paying attention to?
This was actually an interesting category, and then I thought about some teams like Babson, which I mentioned earlier, and like St. Lawrence at SLU. But actually, those are programs that are very, very well known. So the ones I settled on were North Central in Illinois, one of the CCIW teams that last year had an incredible 18-2-1 season. They won the CCIW tournament. They did get to avoid North Park in the tournament because Wheaton upset North Park in the semifinals. But they had a great season. They made the NCAA tournament. And this year they're 7-0-2, so they're unbeaten. And they've beaten, teams that aren't necessarily doing great this year, but very solid, well-known programs like Kalamazoo, Carleton, Wartburg, Dubuque. They tied with Rose-Hulman, which is a really, really tough team. So that's one. Then I have Otterbein at 5-1 that they had one tight loss to Case Western earlier in the season. They beat Center. Center's having just a disastrous season. They beat Trine and Hanover, who were both NCAA teams last year. I think they got a little bit of bad break, and maybe Owu did too when the Otterbein Owu game got canceled last week.
Yeah.
But last year, Otterbein was like 15-2-4. 7-0-2 in their conference, and they were basically nationally ranked in all of these various polls, like wire to wire. And for whatever reason, that's where the reputation, I think, comes in a little bit. Like, if they were North Park or Ohio Wesleyan or Tufts, I mean, they'd be in the top 15 right now. But I don't even, they really haven't even registered yet.
Yeah.
They got a great coach, Jason Griffiths, who I think he played at Kentucky and then he had a cup of coffee in the MLS, but he's done a great job there. Then I go to Ohio Northern at 5-2-1. They've had a brutal schedule. They lost to Kenyon in North Park. The Kenyon game was closer than it looked. And they've beaten Kalamazoo, Ohio Wesleyan, Hanover, Rose-Hulman. Mm-hmm. They drew with Carnegie Mellon on a back-to-back game. So I think they're going to be right there with John Carroll and Otterbein in the OAC. So I think they're pretty good. And then my two sort of wild cards are Mary Hardin Baylor, the Crusaders out of Belton, Texas, who were 4-1-1. They had one bad loss, 4-1 to a very good St. Thomas team. But otherwise, they beat Trinity. They beat Southwestern, that's had some good results. Their first-year coach, Ben Allen, is a graduate of the school in 2012, and he was part of their first program NCAA appearance in, I think it was 2009. And then my final one, and this fits into my high risk for first time, last time category in terms of a mention, but is Sewanee in Tennessee, otherwise known as the University of the South. They're 7-1. They lost 1-0 to Washington and Lee. They did get, it looked like they got statistically, I didn't see the game, but statistically the shots were 22-2, so that might not be good. But they beat Maryville, who's recently been in the NCAA tournament. They beat Emory, they beat Berry, and then last night they beat Covenant at Covenant, and Covenant knocked out Denison in the tournament last year.
Yeah.
They got 19 goals for, 1 against. Their coach, Tony Pacella, is an Elizabethtown graduate who was part of the Serpone Amherst coaching tree. He was an assistant at Amherst. And a little fun fact, he was the 2011 Best Male Athlete of the Year at Elizabethtown.
Yeah.
So we'll see. They have a big game Friday against Oglethorpe, and people are always interested in who can pull off the coveted Covenant Oglethorpe double.
Yeah.
So we'll see how the Tigers do. I think that's Friday night or Friday afternoon. So those were my under the radar group.
There are. I've been noticing Mary Hardin Baylor and Ohio Northern, because at the very beginning of this season, both of those, I knew Ohio Northern was going to have a bear of a schedule.
Yeah.
And I watched a couple games and they looked like it was hard. And I thought, this year's going to be a down year. And then I turn around and lo and behold, they're
right. Yeah, I think you interviewed their coach, right?
Yeah. He's a fantastic guy. He really has his head on, has his ideas, and he's the one who told me like it's going to be brutal for a start. And so, I mean, to be 5-2-1 or something like that.
5-2-1, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's fantastic, right? Like, if they were 2-4-2 or something like that, they would. Like that, I could adjust it. You could look at the schedule and be like, "Look at the schedule. Oh my gosh, it's not that they're bad, but the fact that they've done so well." Hey, which you mentioned one game, and just to lastly, are there any games that this weekend that you have your eyes on that you think are gonna be some humdingers of the game?
Yeah, this is one of the tough ones for me because as you know from the boards, I like to mention 25 games, and so coming up with a few was tougher. But tonight is another one of the so-called match of the season games. We had this with obviously Messiah, Washington Lee opening day, and then the next week we had the big Nescac College at Tufts and Middlebury at Amherst. I think this is definitely in that category. This might be the best of all of them, is North Park at Chicago.
Yeah.
Basically, 2 of the top 3 or top 4 teams in terms of rankings. So that's who do you got in that one?
Oh my gosh. I'm going to go, you know what? I'm going to go with Chicago. And it has nothing to do with their offense. It has everything to do with their defense. Yeah. Their back line is just frigging fantastic.
Yeah. I'm going to cop out and say 2-2.
Oh, all right. That's fair. I could see that too, though, okay, 2-2.
Right. Yeah, maybe, but by your thinking, I should go with 0-0.
0 or 1-1. I could accept that.
Right.
It'll be 4-4, and I'll be totally discredited. What does he know about soccer?
Well, North Park is pretty explosive, so
they are.
That is actually a fascinating matchup.
Yeah.
Those 2 center backs against North Park's offensive explosion.
Oh my gosh, yeah. I mean, they could light it up. They're that talented on the attack. They're probably the best, I think.
Right, and Chicago is, Yanuszewski, who last year was a star. I don't know if he was a little bit injured at first or if he's off to a slow start, but they got a couple of freshmen that are just like out of this world.
The one kid who scored. The one kid.
I think number 7 is. I can't think of his name off the top of my head, but they're just both really. I mean, both national title contenders.
Yeah, easily.
Definitely.
And this is just game. They could see each other again. Like that's how good that. Like they're
exactly. That could be an Elite Eight or NCAA semifinal.
Yep.
And then 2 others for tonight, sort of under that headliner, would be Denison and Otterbein, which is a huge Great Lakes battle. A win there for either one of them would be huge down the road. And then St. Lawrence at RPI. St. Lawrence prefers to play on grass. RPI is a turf field. I know our Saints fans on the board are going to be biting their fingernails during this one. But that should be a great game.
Yeah.
And then Thursday, the only thing I really noticed was Skidmore at Clarkson. People like me are still sort of on the fence about Clarkson. That'll be a good test for them.
Yeah.
Friday, we've heard some people talk about the altitude in Colorado. St. Thomas is traveling to Colorado.
Yep.
So we'll see how St. Thomas handles that. And then Saturday, what's catching my eye is obviously Messiah at Christopher Newport, Johns Hopkins at Gettysburg. We'll see what Gettysburg has really got. A big landmark clash between Catholic and Drew. Although Catholic, I think that was their first loss last night.
First loss. Yeah.
NYU at Carnegie Mellon. I'm one of the Carnegie Mellon doubters, so I'll be interested to follow that one. Then you've got a huge Nescac trio of Middlebury at Wesleyan, Hamilton at Conn College, and then the original Classic playing in their 245th game, Amherst at Williams. Amherst at Williams was like the game pre-Tufts, the emergence of Tufts. So I'm really, even though they've already got too many great teams, if Williams ends up being good, that's going to be really fascinating.
Yeah.
And then to cap off the week, I've got Chicago at Rochester that none of us will watch because my daughter's school has that paywall. I can't stand.
Drives me nuts, and it's
that's
the
like
only
insane.
School.
It's insane. Like a UAA school that like you can't watch the games.
And they have Rochester has like the 7th largest endowment in the country. Like they're like
I don't know. I don't even recruiting wise. I don't know how it serves their purpose to like not show their games. So
but
Coach
hey,
Apple,
$6.99 for the season. I'll tell you.
Yeah. So Coach Apple, if you're watching, like fix that. And then this is sort of a flyer. I'm putting up a upset. This will make you happy. I'm putting up an upset alert on Gustavus Adolphus at University of Wisconsin Whitewater.
I don't know about makes me happy, but I'm like Gustavus Adolphus, like, like respectfully. Yeah. I just respectfully, like before I get in trouble. So yeah. Well, I'm certainly like you, certainly going to be busy. I'll be watching. Like these are. I mean, tonight's game is really. Watch. It'll be a tie because neither team's going to want to make a mistake. And they're just gonna, hyper cautious and yeah.
Well, that's obviously one you're gonna publish your notes on, right?
Oh, totally. Yeah. That one definitely I'll do. That one I've had to cut back with this channel, and I had to cut back on all the notes that I was taking because then I would have serious problems requiring psychological help if I did that as well. And actually, I'd probably get fired from my regular job. So it's like, all
Well,
right.
no, seriously though, like congratulations. It's like, I mean, what you've done in like literally, what is it, 11 or 12 months time is just like unbelievable. I mean,
I can't believe it. I can't
Yeah.
believe it. This is fun, right? Like this to me is just fun. Look,
Yeah.
what, you know, if you're a junkie, right, of whatever, what's better than to speak to another junkie about whatever it is? So in my case, it's just soccer and D3. I just, just love it. And there's so much there. I don't think people
I know.
realize.
I don't know why we love it so much, but we do.
Well, if you don't know, we're in trouble because you're the shrink,
I
right?
do not know. I do not know.
So, hey, Nicholas, really, thanks for this. We're going to do this again next week. So start prepping and, Thank you very much.
All right. Thanks for having me.
Thanks. All right. So I hope you enjoyed Nicholas's take on what's going on in D3 soccer. Hope you enjoyed. Looking forward to it. If you have any comments, by all means, down below, shoot me an email or go on d3soccer.com and post on the men's soccer board. Really do appreciate any feedback and really had a blast with Nicholas. That, like I said, we're gonna do this again. So hope you enjoy.